The snow fell dirty the night Clara was sold. She stood under a flickering streetlight at the edge of the industrial district, silent while her adopted parents negotiated her price, $25,000. Final offer. The transaction took less than 5 minutes. Then a stranger arrived, a man with quiet authority and dangerous calm, and paid a debt that wasn't his. He looked at Clara once and said 4 words that changed everything. "I don't want to see your face again." But he wasn't talking to her. What follows is a story about the spaces between violence and safety, about children who learn to breathe again, and about a girl told she was barren who grows a family in soil everyone else called dead. This is a story about what grows after winter. The snow fell dirty that night, gray flakes that clung to Clara's shoulders like ash. She stood under the single flickering streetlight at the edge of the industrial district, where the warehouses gave way to empty lots and broken fences. The wind cut through her thin coat, but she didn't shiver. She'd learned years ago that stillness made you smaller. Invisible, almost. Her adopted father's voice rose above the wind. "We said 20,000. That was the agreement." The interest changed the number. The man across from him, thick-necked, expensive watch, breath clouding white, didn't look at Clara. Nobody did. "You're 3 months late. You know how this works." "She's worth more than that." Her adopted mother spoke flatly, arms crossed, face turned away from Clara like she was negotiating a car lease. "She's healthy. She works. She doesn't cause problems." Clara fixed her eyes on the snow accumulating at her feet. The words washed over her the way they always had, transactional, clinical, emptied of anything human. She was 16 years old. She knew what was happening. She just didn't know how to stop it. A small crowd had gathered in the cold, men in long coats, a few women watching from car windows, faces lit by dashboard glow. Witnesses. But no one moved. No one spoke. They watched the way people watch accidents, with morbid stillness, relieved it wasn't happening to them. "Final offer," the thick-necked man said. 25. Take it or I call it in." Her father's jaw worked. Her mother's fingers drummed against her coat sleeve. Clara waited for the outcome she already knew. Then the headlights came. A black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the lot, engine purring low. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, dark-haired, Korean, mid-30s. He moved through the snow with the kind of calm that didn't ask for space. It was simply given. The crowd shifted. The thick-necked man straightened. The man, Roman, though Clara wouldn't learn his name until later, stopped a few feet away. His eyes swept the scene once, Clara shivering and silent, her parents tense and calculating, the crowd frozen in complicity. "How much?" His voice was quiet, barely louder than the wind. "This doesn't concern you," her father started. Roman's gaze didn't move. "How much?" The thick-necked man named the figure. Roman reached into his coat, withdrew an envelope, and handed it over without counting. The man rifled through it, nodded once, and stepped back. Roman turned to Clara's parents. His expression hadn't changed. No anger, no disgust, just cold, bottomless certainty. "The debt is paid," he said. "I don't want to see your face again." Her father opened his mouth, closed it. Her mother looked away. They left. Engine starting, taillights fading into the snow. Gone. Clara stood alone under the streetlight, wind biting through her coat, surrounded by strangers who were already dispersing. Free, technically. But homeless, unnamed, unclaimed. Roman watched her for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the sedan. "Get in," he said. Not a command, not a request, something else entirely. Clara looked at the empty street where her parents had disappeared, then at the man who had just paid $25,000 for a girl he didn't know. The snow fell heavier now, erasing footprints, covering evidence. She got in the car. The house wasn't what Clara expected. Not a mansion, not warm, not welcoming, just a 2-story structure at the end of a quiet street, paint fading, porch light burned out. Roman unlocked the front door and stepped aside, letting her enter first. Clara's muscles coiled. This was the moment, the reveal, the trap, the reason. She'd been bought. Now came the payment. But Roman only removed his coat, hung it on a hook by the door, and moved toward the kitchen without looking back. The interior was Spartan, worn furniture, mismatched dishes visible through a doorway. No decorations, no photographs, the kind of house that existed purely for function, nothing more. "There's a room upstairs," Roman said, filling a glass with water at the sink. "Second door on the left. Bathrooms across the hall." Clara waited for the rest. The rules. The expectations. The consequences. None came. A creak on the staircase made her turn. 4 children stood on the landing, staring down at her. The youngest, a boy, maybe 6, had wide eyes and a gap-toothed smile barely contained. He gripped the banister like he wanted to vault over it, hopeful, curious. "Sam, back to bed." Roman's voice was quiet but firm. Next to Sam stood a girl, perhaps 8, with dark hair pulled into a messy braid. She watched Clara the way prey watches predators, alert, calculating escape routes, anxious, watchful. "You too, Nora." Behind them, a boy around 10 leaned against the wall, face turned toward the shadows. He didn't look at Clara, didn't look at anything, withdrawn, silent. Wyatt, the oldest, a boy, maybe 13, stood at the top of the stairs with his arms crossed. His jaw was set, eyes hard. He looked at Clara like she was an infection. "Who's she?" His voice dripped hostility. "Caleb." Roman set down his glass. "Bed." "You brought another one home?" Caleb's hands clenched. "We don't have room. We don't have bed. Now." The tone didn't rise, didn't sharpen, but something in it made Caleb's mouth snap shut. He turned and disappeared down the hallway, footsteps heavy with anger. The other 3 followed, Sam reluctantly, Nora silently, Wyatt like a ghost. Clara stood in the entryway, waiting. Roman gestured toward the stairs. "Second door on the left." She climbed slowly, every nerve screaming. The hallway was dim, doors closed. She found the room, small, bare, a single bed with faded sheets, a window overlooking the street. No lock on the door. No lock. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her coat. Listened to the house settle around her, footsteps in other rooms, water running, a door closing, then silence. Roman never came upstairs, never checked on her, never explained what happened next. Clara waited in the darkness, muscles tense, ears straining for the sound of footsteps in the hall, for the door to open, for hands reaching, for the violence that always came after men paid money. But the house stayed quiet. Hours passed. The wind rattled the window. Snow continued to fall outside, visible in the streetlight's glow. Clara lay down fully dressed, coat still on, boots still laced. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't let her guard drop. She waited for something bad to happen, and waited, and waited. Clara woke before dawn, still dressed, neck stiff from sleeping at attention. The house was silent. She moved downstairs carefully, testing each step for creaks. In the kitchen, she found evidence of a morning routine, empty cereal bowls in the sink, a half-full coffee pot, school bags lined up by the door. She started with the dishes. Her hands knew the work. She'd been useful before. It was the only currency she'd ever had. Be quiet. Be helpful. Be invisible until needed. Maybe if she proved her worth, the waiting would end. Maybe she'd understand why she was here. The children left for school without speaking to her. Roman nodded once and followed them out. Clara cleaned, swept, wiped down counters that were already clean. By afternoon, she decided to cook. There were ingredients, rice, vegetables, chicken in the freezer, basic things. She'd made meals before, in her previous house, when her mother was too tired or too angry to bother. But this kitchen was different. The stove ran hotter, the pots were unfamiliar, and her hands, steady yesterday, trembled now. The rice burned, stuck black to the bottom of the pot, filling the kitchen with acrid smoke. Clara scraped frantically, heart pounding, ruined, wasted, stupid. She started over, made soup instead, simple, harder to ruin. But her hands shook when she carried the pot to the table, and the edge caught the counter, and soup sloshed over the side, scalding her wrist, splattering across the floor in a spreading puddle. Clara froze, stared at the mess, at the waste. She waited for the yelling. The door opened. Roman's footsteps in the hallway. Clara's breath stopped. She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there with soup dripping from her burned wrist, waiting for the anger, for the punishment, for the cold calculation of whether she was worth keeping. Roman appeared in the doorway, surveyed the scene, the burned pot in the sink, the soup spreading across the tile, Clara standing rigid in the middle of it. "I'm sorry." Her voice came out broken. "I'll clean it. I'll replace. I can fix. It's only soup." Clara blinked. The words didn't make sense. Roman moved past her, grabbed a towel from the drawer, and crouched to wipe the floor. Not angry, not disgusted, just dealing with it. "You burned your wrist," he said without looking up. "It's fine. Run it under cold water." It wasn't a suggestion. Clara moved to the sink on autopilot, turned on the tap, let the cold water stream over the reddening skin. Behind her, Roman cleaned in silence. The soup disappeared. The towel went in the laundry. He pulled out a plate, filled it with leftover rice from the pot that hadn't burned, and set it on the table. "Eat," he said. Then he left. Clara stood at the sink, water still running, staring at nothing. It's only soup, not "you're useless," not "what a waste," not "one more mistake and you're gone." Just, it's only soup. Something cracked inside her chest, small, painful, like ice breaking. She turned off the water, sat at the table, stared at the rice, and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears that she wiped away quickly, shoulders shaking, breath hitching in her throat. By the time the children came home, she'd composed herself. But they noticed something different. Sam smiled at her from the doorway. Nora set her backpack down without running upstairs. Even Wyatt glanced at her, brief, but there. Caleb still scowled, but his eyes lingered a second longer, searching. Clara felt them watching, and for the first time, she didn't feel like prey. The crying started just after midnight. Clara woke instantly, years of light sleeping embedded in her survival instincts. She heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, uneven. Roman's voice, low and tight, with something she hadn't heard from him before, fear. She opened her door. Roman stood outside Nora's room, one hand braced against the doorframe. Inside, the little girl thrashed weakly against sweat-soaked sheets, whimpering. "How high?" Clara asked. Roman looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed lost. 104. It won't come down." Clara moved past him into the room. Nora's face was flushed, eyes glassy and unfocused. Her breath came fast and shallow. "Cold compresses," Clara said. "Not ice, too much shock, and we need to control her breathing before it spirals." Roman didn't move. Just stared at his daughter like she was slipping away, and he didn't know how to hold on. "Bathroom," Clara said, sharper now. "Clean washcloths. Cool water, not cold. Go." He went. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, placed one hand gently on Nora's forehead. The heat radiated through her palm. The girl's eyes rolled toward her, unfocused. "Hey," Clara said softly. "I'm here. You're okay." Nora whimpered, tried to speak, couldn't form words. Roman returned with the cloths. Clara wrung one out, folded it, and laid it across Nora's forehead, another on her neck. She worked methodically, wrists, inner elbows, behind the knees, places where blood ran close to the surface. "Breathe with me," Clara told Nora. "In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Nora's breathing was ragged, panicked. Clara kept her voice steady, kept the rhythm, kept her hand on the girl's small shoulder. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Slowly, so slowly. Nora's breathing began to sink. The thrashing eased. Clara changed the compresses, checked the girl's pulse, monitored the too-fast flutter beneath her fingertips, and without thinking, without planning, she began to sing. It was something from before, from a life she barely remembered, a melody her first mother had sung, in a language she'd mostly forgotten. The words were gone, but the tune remained, buried deep. She sang quietly, just above a whisper, letting the rhythm replace the fear. Nora's eyes drifted closed. Her breathing deepened. Clara kept singing. In the doorway, Sam appeared, rubbing his eyes. Then Wyatt, silent as always. And finally Caleb, arms crossed, face carefully blank. Roman stood frozen against the wall, watching Clara's hands gentle on his daughter's face, listening to a melody that reached back through years of loss. "She sings like Mom," Sam whispered. The words hung in the air. Roman's jaw tightened. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, something in them had shifted. Some wall, carefully maintained, had developed a crack. Caleb's arms slowly uncrossed. He didn't speak, but the hostility had drained from his shoulders. Clara felt their eyes on her, all of them, but differently than before, not assessing her usefulness, not calculating her threat, seeing her. An hour later, Nora's fever broke. Her breathing evened into sleep. Clara stayed beside her, one hand resting lightly on the girl's wrist, feeling the pulse steady and slow. Roman moved to the other side of the bed. He didn't speak, didn't thank her, just sat in the chair by the window and kept watch. At dawn, Clara finally stood to leave. "Stay," Roman said quietly. She looked at him. "You should sleep," he clarified, "in your room, but stay." Clara understood. Not stay in this room. Stay in this house. Stay with us. She nodded once and left, her legs unsteady, her chest tight with something she didn't have a name for. Behind her, the house breathed differently. She was part of it now.
Roman came home at 3 a.m. Clara heard the car door first. Quiet. Deliberate. Then footsteps on the porch. Heavier than usual. The front door opened and closed with careful control, like he was trying not to wake anyone. She was already awake. Sleep still came in fragments, old habits refusing to die. She heard him pause in the entryway. Heard the wet sound of fabric being removed. Then running water from the kitchen sink. Clara sat up, listened. The water ran for a long time. She pulled on her coat, still her instinct, still ready to run, and went downstairs. Roman stood at the sink with his back to her, shirt discarded on the floor. Blood spiraled down the drain in pink ribbons. His knuckles were split, bruised dark. A gash ran along his forearm, still seeping. The shirt on the floor wasn't pink. It was red, soaked through. Clara stopped in the doorway. Roman stilled, sensing her presence. He didn't turn around. "Go back to bed," he said quietly. She should have. She should have gone upstairs, packed the few things she'd been given, and disappeared before dawn. Because she understood now. Understood what the quiet authority meant. What the envelope full of cash meant. Why strangers had stepped back when he arrived. This house was built on violence. Roman was dangerous. But Clara didn't move. She crossed to the cabinet, pulled out the first aid kit she'd found while cleaning, and set it on the counter beside him. Then she turned on the overhead light. Roman flinched at the brightness. Turned his head slightly, not quite looking at her. The blood wasn't all his. She could tell by the spray pattern on his shoulder, the smears that didn't correspond to any visible wound. "You should leave." His voice was flat. Empty. You shouldn't see this." Clara opened the first aid kit. Pulled out antiseptic, gauze, medical tape. "Sit down," she said. "Clara." "Sit down." He sat. She cleaned the gash on his forearm first. Long, shallow, probably from glass or metal. He didn't flinch when the antiseptic hit. Didn't make a sound. She wrapped it methodically, the way she'd learned from patching herself up over the years. "You don't want to know?" Roman asked finally. "What happened?" "What I did." Clara moved to his knuckles, dabbing away blood, checking for anything embedded in the torn skin. "No," she said. "Why not?" She met his eyes for the first time. They were hollow, waiting for judgment, for fear, for her to finally understand what he was, and run. "Because I only care who you are at home." Roman stared at her. Clara finished wrapping his knuckles, packed the first aid kit away, and rinsed the blood from the sink. She picked up his ruined shirt, carried it to the laundry room, and dropped it in the basin to soak. When she returned, Roman hadn't moved. He sat at the kitchen table, hands resting on the wood, staring at nothing. "The children," he said quietly. They don't know. I keep it away from them. I keep them safe from... I know. You can't know. I know, Clara repeated. Because they sleep through the night. Because Sam smiles. Because Nora's fever broke and you fell apart. Because you've never touched me, never threatened me, never treated me like property, even though you paid for me. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. I know who you are out there, she said. I don't care. I only care who you are here. Roman looked at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed, like she'd named something he hadn't known was possible. His hands trembled once, barely visible, before he steadied them. You should still leave, he said, but there was no conviction in it. Clara shook her head. I'm not going anywhere. The words settled between them, heavy with choice, with clarity. Roman closed his eyes, released a breath he'd been holding for years, and Clara understood. She just made herself necessary in a way that couldn't be undone. The man came to the house on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was folding laundry in the living room when she heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, too aggressive to be friendly. Through the window, she saw a sleek car idling at the curb, engine running. Roman answered the door. Didn't open it fully. Kept his body blocking the entrance. The conversation was brief. Low voices. Then a name. Sam's name. Spoken loud enough for Clara to hear. Then Nora's. Wyatt's. Caleb's. Her own. The door closed. The car pulled away. Roman stood in the entryway for a long moment, hands still on the doorknob, shoulders rigid. Pack your things, he said without turning around. Clara set down the shirt she'd been folding. What? There's a place. Upstate. Clean ID, cash, everything you need. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. You leave tonight. What about the children? They're my problem. And me? You were never supposed to be part of this. He finally turned to face her. His expression was carefully blank, but his eyes betrayed him. Guilt, fear, calculation. I brought you here. I made you visible. Now you're a target. Clara's hands stilled. They named me. Yes. To threaten you. Yes. She stood up slowly. Then sending me away doesn't solve anything. It just tells them it worked. It keeps you alive. For how long? Clara crossed her arms. You think they'll forget about me? That I can just disappear and be safe? She shook her head. I've been disappeared before, Roman. It doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to find. This is different. No, it's not. Her voice hardened. You're trying to protect me by making me alone again. By sending me back out there with no one and nothing? You think that's safety? Roman's jaw tightened. I think it's better than what happens if you stay. Why? Because they will use you to get to me. They will hurt you to make a point. And He stopped, breathed, started again. I can't protect you and them. Not if it comes down to it. Then don't protect me. Clara, protect the children. That's your job. That's what you do. She stepped closer. But don't send me away and pretend it's for my own good. If you want me gone, say it. Say you don't want me here. That's not. Then why? Her voice cracked slightly. Why do you care what happens to me? Roman stared at her. For a moment, the careful control slipped, and she saw something raw beneath it, something that looked like desperation. Because you shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes, he said quietly. Clara felt the words settle in her chest. She thought about the snow. The transaction. The moment he'd looked at her adopted parents and paid a debt that wasn't his. You want to know why I won't leave? She asked. Roman said nothing. Because you were the first person who looked at me like I was human. The silence stretched between them. Vast. Fragile. Not property, Clara continued. Not a burden. Not a problem to solve. You looked at me like I mattered. Like I was worth something beyond what I could do, or how much trouble I caused. Her voice steadied. So no, I'm not leaving. Not because you feel guilty. Not because it's dangerous. This is the first place I've ever felt like I belong to myself. Roman's throat worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. If you stay, I stay. Clara, I stay. The words hung in the air. Final. Irrevocable. Roman looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Sharp. Dayton? Accepting. Then we do this together, he said. Clara nodded back. And the loyalty that had been building between them, careful, tested, hard-won, finally sealed itself into something unbreakable. Roman left at dusk. He didn't announce it, didn't gather the children for explanations or false reassurances. He simply moved through the house with quiet purpose, checking locks, leaving cash in the kitchen drawer, writing a phone number on a scrap of paper, and tucking it under the coffee pot. Clara watched from the hallway as he pulled on his coat. Keep them inside, he said without looking at her. All night, no matter what. Oh, okay. He paused at the door, hand on the knob. His shoulders rose and fell with a single breath. If I'm not back by morning, you will be. Roman turned his head slightly. Not enough to meet her eyes. Just enough to acknowledge the words. Then he left. The door closed. The engine started. Taillights disappeared down the street, and the house held its breath. Clara fed the children early. Pasta. Simple, filling, requiring minimal attention. They ate quietly, sensing something in the air, asking no questions. Caleb's eyes kept drifting to the window. Nora sat close to Clara's elbow. Sam pushed food around his plate, unusually subdued. Wyatt didn't eat at all. Board games, Clara announced when the dishes were clear. Living room, now. Meow. They obeyed without argument. She set up Monopoly on the coffee table, a game that could stretch for hours, that required enough focus to keep their minds occupied. They played in near silence, the only sounds the rattle of dice and the shuffle of paper money. Outside, darkness settled thick and complete. Clara glanced at the clock. 8:30. By 10, Sam had fallen asleep against Nora's shoulder. Clara carried him upstairs, tucked him in, and returned to find Wyatt staring blankly at the television. Falling off, images flickering in the dark. Caleb sat at the window, forehead pressed to the glass. He'll come back, Clara said quietly. Caleb didn't respond. She left them to their vigil and went outside. The backyard was a graveyard of neglect. Dead plants in cracked pots. Overgrown weeds choking what might have once been flower beds. A rusted trellis collapsed against the fence. Clara found work gloves in the shed and began clearing. She pulled weeds by the roots, feeling them give way beneath her hands, dragged broken pots to the corner, straightened the trellis, tested its stability. The work was methodical, physical, grounding. The garden had been dead for years, left to rot after something. Someone had stopped tending it. But the soil underneath was still good, still capable of growing things. Clara worked in the dark, guided by the porch light's weak glow. Her hands grew cold, then numb. She didn't stop. She cleared a space, just a small one, enough to start over. When she finally came inside, her fingers were stiff and dirt-stained. Caleb was still at the window. Wyatt had fallen asleep on the couch. Clara washed her hands, made tea she didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table. The clock ticked. 11. Midnight. Dot. 1. Outside, the street remained empty. Silent. Clara thought about Roman's hands wrapping around a steering wheel, about the blood she'd cleaned from his knuckles, about the careful way he'd said goodbye without saying it. She thought about the children sleeping upstairs, trusting that morning would come and he'd be there. 2. 3. The night stretched endlessly, each minute expanding into something vast and hollow. Clara didn't pray, didn't pace, didn't let herself imagine the alternatives. She simply waited. At 4:15, Caleb's head drooped against the window. His breathing evened into sleep. Clara covered him with a blanket, left the porch light on, and returned to the kitchen. The scrap of paper with the phone number sat under the coffee pot. She didn't touch it. 5, 6. Dawn began to creep across the horizon, pale, hesitant, offering no promises. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the street, and waited. The car returned at 7:18. Clara heard the engine first. Familiar, struggling. It coughed once before cutting out in front of the house. The driver's door opened. Closed. Footsteps on the walkway. Slow. Uneven. She was at the front door before he reached it. Roman stood on the porch, leaning heavily against the railing. His face was pale beneath the bruising, split lip already swelling. Blood had dried in a dark line from his temple to his jaw. His right arm hung at an awkward angle. Their eyes met. "I'm okay," he said. Then his knees buckled. Clara caught him before he fell, or tried to. His weight pulled them both down, and they ended up half collapsed against the doorframe, his shoulder wedged against her ribs, breathing ragged in her ear. Inside, she managed. "Come on." She got him to the couch. He moved like every muscle had been tested and found wanting, each step a negotiation between will and capability. "Children," he rasped. "Asleep. All of them." He nodded once, closed his eyes. Clara knelt beside the couch, assessing. The head wound looked worse than it was. Scalp cuts always bled heavily. The lip would heal. The arm concerned her most. He couldn't lift it without his breath hitching. "Ribs?" she asked. "Bruised, not broken." "You sure?" "I'm sure." Young? She didn't argue. Went to get the first aid kit, a basin of warm water, clean towels. When she returned, Roman hadn't moved, just sat there, head tipped back, staring at the ceiling. Clara set everything on the coffee table and began to work. She cleaned the head wound first, her movements gentle but efficient. Roman didn't flinch. Just let her tend him the way he'd let her stay. Without protest, without pretense. The silence between them was different now. Not empty. Full of things that didn't need saying. Clara moved to his lip, dabbing carefully. The split wasn't deep, but it would scar. "You should see the other guy," Roman said quietly. Clara didn't smile. "Is he alive?" "Yes." "Will he stay that way?" "For now." She nodded. Moved to check his arm, probing gently along the shoulder. Roman's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "Dislocated?" she asked. "Was. I reset it." "Yourself?" "Didn't have much choice." Clara shook her head. "Wrapped his ribs anyway, even though he said they weren't broken. Better to be careful." When she finished, she sat back on her heels. Roman opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. Saw the dirt still under her fingernails from the garden. The exhaustion in her face. The way she'd stayed awake all night, waiting. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Clara interrupted. "I did." Roman's throat worked. "Clara, you came back." Her voice was steady. "That's what matters." He reached out with his good hand, slowly, telegraphing the movement, and touched her wrist. Just his fingers resting against her pulse point. Warm. Alive. "Thank you," he said. Clara covered his hand with hers. They stayed like that, her kneeling beside the couch, him battered and exhausted, both of them breathing in the quiet morning light filtering through the windows. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. Sam's voice muffled. Nora responding. The house was waking up. Roman started to rise. "I should rest," Clara said firmly. "I'll handle breakfast." "They'll want to see." "They'll see you alive. That's enough." Roman settled back, too tired to argue. His eyes followed her as she stood, gathered the first aid supplies, carried everything to the kitchen. She heard him shift on the couch, heard the relief in his exhale, and Clara understood. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not safe, but present, choosing each other. Again and again, she started the coffee pot, pulled out eggs and bread. Behind her, Roman's breathing evened into something close to sleep. The children's footsteps thundered down the stairs, and the house, battered, tested, holding, breathed easier. Spring came slowly to the house at the end of the street. The snow melted in patches, revealing the bones of the garden Clara had been tending through the final weeks of winter. She worked in the early mornings before the children woke, turning soil that had been left to die, coaxing it back to something that could sustain life. Roman watched from the kitchen window sometimes, coffee in hand, saying nothing. The children helped when they wanted to. Sam brought her stones he thought were pretty. Nora planted wildflower seeds in careful rows. Even Wyatt knelt beside her once, silent as always, and pulled weeds with methodical precision. Caleb still watched from a distance, but he watched. Inside, the house had shifted into something that resembled routine. Breakfast at 7. School by 8. Homework at the kitchen table while Clara cooked dinner. Roman home by 6 most nights. Sometimes later, sometimes with new bruises, but always home. The violence hadn't disappeared. Clara knew that. She heard the late-night phone calls, saw the tension that settled in Roman's shoulders when certain names were mentioned. The world he moved through hadn't changed, but he contained it, kept it outside these walls. And when he came home, he left it at the door. That was enough. Nora had nightmares less frequently now. When she did, Clara was there. Cold compress, steady breathing, the same wordless lullaby. Sam smiled easily again, gap-toothed and hopeful. Wyatt still didn't speak much, but he sat closer during meals, let his shoulder brush Clara's sometimes when they passed in the hallway. Caleb's hostility had eroded into something quieter. Wary acceptance, maybe, or a beginning of trust. He'd stopped asking when she was leaving. They were healing, not fixed, not rewritten into some fantasy of undamaged children, but healing in the way broken things do, imperfectly, with scars, carrying what they'd survived, but no longer defined by it. One morning in early April, Clara knelt in the garden and found the first green shoots breaking through the soil. She sat back on her heels, dirt under her fingernails, and felt something loosen in her chest. It's growing. She turned. Roman stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets. Yeah, Clara said. It is. He crouched beside her, studied the small shoots. I thought this was dead. She stopped trying after he stopped. Started again. It's been years. Clara knew he meant the children's mother. Knew the garden had been hers once. Knew she'd left it. Left them. And Roman had let it die rather than tend something that reminded him of loss. Soil's still good, Clara said quietly. Just needed someone to care. Roman looked at her. You're talking about more than the garden. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what they used to say about you? Your old family? Clara's hands stilled. I heard them, that night, before I paid. His voice was careful. They said you were barren, that you'd never amount to anything, that you couldn't grow anything worthwhile. Clara felt the old words like stones in her chest. She'd heard them so many times they'd become truth. They were wrong, Roman said. Clara looked at the garden, at the green shoots pushing through dead soil, at the house behind them, windows warm with light, at the children inside, healing, growing, choosing to stay. Yeah, she said softly. They were. Roman's hand found hers in the dirt, squeezed once. They knelt there as the sun rose higher, warming the air, coaxing more life from the ground. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table while the children did homework. Sam argued with Nora about fractions. Wyatt worked silently. Caleb asked Clara to check his essay. Gruff, reluctant, but asking. Roman came home at 6:15, tired but whole. He kissed Nora's head in passing, ruffled Sam's hair, squeezed Wyatt's shoulder. His eyes found Clara's across the room. She smiled, and in that moment, Clara understood. This was what she'd been sold for $25,000 to find. Not ownership. Not rescue. Home. Not the building. Not the address. But this, the presence of people who chose to stay, who tended each other's wounds, who grew together in soil everyone else had called barren. Love as the quiet decision to remain. Safety as the promise to keep coming back. Outside, the garden grew in the dark. Inside, the light stayed on. And Clara, unnamed, unclaimed, told she would never amount to anything, had grown a family anyway.